Hello, global gardeners. Are you ready to talk about some of the enjoyment of gardening today? You've heard me say it many, many times at the end of all my videos enjoy gardening. But what does that really mean to you? And I'll share what it means to me. And I don't think it's necessarily a single answer on a single day. Mobius 981 said, "This question made me have to think." And that's one reason why I wanted to talk about this today, is to get you to think about why you garden. Now, we all have different reasons. It might be to grow our own food, to get exercise, for the health benefits. There are many reasons why we garden. But take that another step, a step where you have to think, what is it about the reason you garden that brings enjoyment to you when you're in your garden? John talks about how it's the health benefits and the taste of the veggies and the apples. Absolutely. The enjoyment is something that just can't be described. I harvested my very first hillbilly tomato this week. It was fantastic. I can't really describe the flavor. I can't really describe exactly what happened other than to say I enjoyed it. And I've now added hillbilly to my list of tomatoes that I may grow in the future because of that single event, tasting the very first hillbilly tomato. And Wilson is saying my biggest reason is for the joy of it. Absolutely. Whether I succeed or fail is secondary. I just love being outdoors and enjoying nature. What's better than that? I like getting out in my garden so much. You can see this in my videos that I'm out in my garden when the temperature is below freezing, in the middle of snowstorms, and during the summer in the middle of heat waves. It doesn't matter to me what the weather is. I like being outdoors in my garden, enjoying nature. Absolutely. Mobius, after thinking about it, says, I think the thing I enjoy most is, if I had to pick, is the joy of being in nature and learning, always learning, creating a micro ecosystem, being connected with the earth. So there's already some trends that are starting to develop. I'm interested in you sharing, as many of you already have. What do you enjoy about gardening? And part of this is for your own self realization so that you can maybe put a, a cognitive thought to why you're in the garden, but also because when you hear what others enjoy, it might strike a chord in you and you say, oh, yeah, I didn't even realize that was one of the benefits that I like about gardening. Absolutely. And I want to say hello to Trolled in Norway. I really enjoy watching tiny plants breaking the surface after sowing a seed. Isn't that incredible? Just wondrous to put a seed in. And there's always, I think it's tinged with the series of emotions. We spend time picking out that seed that we're going to grow. And we take the time to figure out where we're going to grow that seed. And then we put the seed in the ground and we wait. And we're not sure if it's going to germinate. We aren't positive that it's going to emerge from the soil as a tiny seedling. So there's always some doubt, there's always some trepidation, there's always some concern, maybe a little bit of stress about putting that seed in the ground. And then it's wondrous when it emerges, when it finally breaks the surface. I absolutely agree. I enjoy that. There have been times that, of course, I talked about this a few weeks ago, talking to your plants. There have been times that I've been talking to my plants, and I'll actually speak to those little seedlings and thank them in various ways. And sometimes, particularly when I see the seedlings just emerge, and right next to it is another one that's already broken the surface, and it'll literally bring a smile to my face. So, how about you? Share the rest. I'm going to try to scroll down and catch as many of these as I possibly can so that we can share the ideas of what others are doing. And we'll see that there's those similarities, those common threads, but all of us have that different reason. Heidi says, I enjoy growing more than I need to give away to my neighbors and helping a neighbor who is new to market growing have enough to sell at her booth at the local market. I love that. I love that too. What a fantastic thing to do. And then more importantly, you're doing it because it brings you enjoyment. That's a fantastic example, Heidi. And I, like many of you who are growing zucchini, I've been giving away zucchini. So this week, I gave away zucchini to my brother and sister-in-law. I gave away zucchini to my neighbor, and I thoroughly enjoyed handing over the zucchini. Not because I was glad to get rid of it, but because it's good zucchini and I like sharing what I'm growing with somebody else. So absolutely, that's a fantastic way to be out and finding enjoyment in the garden is by sharing what you're doing in the garden. Boothby Garden says mental health, number one. Fantastic. Finding out that there are more than 1 to 2 types of tomatoes, cucumbers, etc. That I like that idea. So first off, I think many of us find that the garden is a de-stressing location. If we're stressed, if there's something in our life that is just causing us concern, off being in the garden is enough to de-stress and to make us feel better. And mental health improvement absolutely follows. But the awareness as we explore gardening, that finding out that it's more than just the tasteless tomatoes at the supermarket, or it's more than just a handful of seeds you might find at the Walmart seed display, that there are hundreds and thousands of options of different varieties of plants that you can grow. And so in one bed this year, I've got 3 different types of cucumbers. To your point, yeah, not only are there more than 1 to 2 types of cucumbers, but one of the cucumbers I'm growing is a white cucumber. So much variety and so much enjoyment when you actually get to harvest and see the results of what you're growing. Rick says real taste. Oh, that can't be understated. The ability to harvest what you're growing and then to actually taste it. I did a video, I think I did it last year, talking about the reasons why scientifically that tomatoes do not taste good that you buy at the store. Part of that is transportation that actually literally causes the taste to decline, the storage that literally causes the taste to decline, and forget the fact that it's just varieties that are selected that can be transported and have no taste. So there is no taste in a lot of the supermarket produce. But when we go out to our own garden and harvest that tomato, we don't have those storage concerns or those transportation concerns. It's just taste. So, absolutely, such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity that we can get. Sherry says the collaboration with nature is inspiring. And I totally agree. So let's talk about that because I've agreed with all of these. It doesn't need to be a singular enjoyment. And so one of the things I get the most enjoyment from is building the garden. That's one reason why, as you can see in the picture that's behind me taken this morning, my garden is big because I just like building it and designing it and planning it and then planting in it and harvesting it. It's a series of events and I enjoy every single event. But that initial building, there's just something about that. You'll see it in a video coming out this week. Last week I had a video where I built a new cement board bed. This week I built a stacked stone bed. And it's just so enjoyable for me to start with nothing and then plan it and then build it and then step back and say, I built that. I made that myself. It's part of my garden now. And as the garden grows, that just gives me more spaces to enjoy and more plants to grow and more things to experiment with and more failures to make and more successes to build upon. all of those to me are the wonders of gardening. Nina says, love being in nature in my own backyard. I like that idea. So nature is a big part of it, and as we've already seen, it's a running theme with many of us. But have you ever really thought about that difference? That nature, for so many people, especially those that live in a city or maybe even a suburb, nature is going someplace else. It's going to the forest. It's going somewhere that there are birds and there are plants and there are insects. And so people generally tend to think of nature as somewhere else. But a garden allows you to have nature in your own backyard. And so, based on the choices of your plants, if you have birdhouses like I do, if you have water features that I always recommend that you have, suddenly your backyard, even in the middle of a city or a suburb, can have all those birds and insects and that wildlife that isn't so wild when suddenly it is part of your own garden. It's all part of your domain. Carla says, I garden for the pure joy, seeing living things in a place where there was bare earth, bringing something to places that were neglected. Oh, I like that idea. And for those of you that have been following me for a while, you can go back to my videos from 5 years ago when this garden that I have now was nothing but bare ground. And completely agree. It is just pure joy to sit back and enjoy what you accomplish when you started with bare earth and then create something that is living and has all that nature. Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful aspect. Mallory says, love being able to catch the live stream. Well, glad you could be here today, Mallory. This is Labor Day in the United States, so it's a holiday. And so I'm hoping that there are a number of you that might not normally get to be on the live stream because you're at work or traveling. And now you can be here because it's a holiday. And so, being a holiday, most of us enjoy our holidays. And that's one reason I wanted to talk about enjoyment today. And I'll give a shout out to Heidi. I noticed that Jay hasn't checked in yet, our fantastic moderator. So, Jay, if you're watching this later, we're missing you. And I hope you're well. And I hope that we have no health issues to be concerned with anymore. But maybe Jay will check on a little bit later. Gina says the harvest success, the food preservation, and the peace of the garden add up to the most satisfaction of any work I've ever done. And that's saying it pretty succinctly, taking a lot of those different components of the gardening and add it all up. That's why I say it's not a singular activity. It could be a sum of multiple activities that actually bring you the most success or most joy in your garden as a result of that harvest success. Shandy's garden says time alone, the solitude, the peace, the miracles, the learning, the long wait for the perfect food. Doesn't gardening teach you all of those aspects? I know that many of us go into gardening hoping that our families will be as interested as we are, especially our kids. And that doesn't always end up being the case. So often we end up gardening alone. And for some people, that's difficult. And they can't, or they choose not to garden because they don't like being alone. And then there's a whole bunch of us that like that solitude. And I look at the solitude a little bit differently because I'm never alone in the garden. Now, sure, I've got my garden dogs, Mala and Lika, that are always following me around the garden. And when I have a busy work day, they're sleeping in the shade or just watching from the shade. But there's also all those insects. There's the bees in the flowers. There's the ants crawling across the ground. So even though it's a solitude, I don't really look at it as being alone. I'm not with any other people, but I'm part of nature, enjoying all the other life around me. And I do find a peace in that as well. And, back to the mental health idea, it is one of those things that really does bring comfort. Soma Alchemy says, I love being independent from my tyrannical government producing nutrient-dense organic food. And it's the freedom. It's you being able to grow what you want to grow, how you want to grow it. And yeah, it's that independence. It's that individuality that you can bring to your garden. And I like sharing my garden. I encourage that you share your garden as well. But ultimately, it comes down to we should be enjoying our own garden, and others aren't going to enjoy it in the same way. They might be impressed. They might give us all those accolades about what we've accomplished. But ultimately, it is just our independence, our time alone, our ability to just decide for ourselves what we're doing and how we're growing. Wasabi Gal ties in with that. Love that feeling of knowing that my food is so pure and not chemically treated. And I love interacting with the critters. I've talked about this before, that especially at the Galileo Garden and now in my new garden, uh, I don't use synthetic chemicals of any type and haven't for years. And I don't necessarily equate that with a love of why I garden, but it certainly acts to supplement the reasons that I enjoy gardening, because I don't have to worry about what I'm eating. I don't have to worry about what I'm giving away. I don't have to tell my neighbor that he needs to wash the zucchini really, really well because I doused it with some chemicals. And so there is that comfort that I think it brings as well. Bowtie Life says, my favorite thing is when the garden is overgrown and I get to hike through what feels like a jungle, changing every time it is new, every day out of character for my routine. That's an interesting perspective as well, especially if you have a lot of routine in your life and a lot of schedule in your life. The garden can totally upend that routine. I like to keep my paths clear, but I have two beds. In fact, the beds that are on either side of my head, uh, both on each side, uh, there's no longer a path between those beds. It's overgrown. They're vining plants, and I've let them grow over the side in between so that it is kind of a bit of a jungle. Towards the end of the season, for me, another couple weeks, I get that as well. You can start to see in these beds how they're peeking out, they're starting to move into the pathways. And I find that enjoyable as well. It is like being in a jungle, especially when you live in a region like mine in Colorado, where there's very little in the way of well, there is no jungle. There's no forests near me. A lot of forests in Colorado, but not near me. It's a lot of open, dry plains and not a lot of plants, except for my neighbor behind me. There's very few trees in my neighborhood. So when I can go into my garden and see a small form of a mini jungle, I guess you could say, I totally agree. Totally agree. That is a lot of fun. Boothby Garden says, went to our local experimental farm gardens recently. I was able to identify 90% of the plants. 5 years ago, that would have not been possible. Fantastic. That's a great opportunity to compare what you are maybe not knowing completely. I strongly encourage going to the botanical gardens, city gardens, anywhere that it might actually be labeled that has little plant tags on them, for that reason, that you can go and look at a plant and identify it. And if you're not sure, you can look at the plant tag and say, yeah, I was right. So good for you. 90% of the plants. That's fantastic. That is truly an accomplishment. Linda says, it just makes me happy. Very succinct. That says it all. Lauren says, I love being part of the ecosystem and feeling that my activities are part of the living world. And it is a connectiveness. Even though we've talked about independence, we've talked about the solitude, it is a connectiveness with the living world. There might not be any people nearby, but like I was talking about with the ants and the bees, there is a lot of living world that's going around, and I think that's important. John says, yes, I love the critters. And so That's one of those things that I I think the more you garden, the more you like the critters, and the more you like the insects. In the beginning, a lot of bugs can be scary. A lot of bugs are unknown. Many people think that all bugs are bad, so they have to be killed. And as you garden more and more, some of those same bugs that might have been scary or you were concerned about early on, you now realize are friends. And so you see them in the garden as good bugs and take advantage of that. Enjoy it. Enjoy the bugs. And Masabi Gal says there are so many joys of gardening. The list is endless. And so good. I'm glad you look at it that way, because that's one of the things I hope to accomplish today is by the end of today's chat, maybe you could recognize that in the beginning it might be hard to identify what is the thing that you enjoy gardening the most. And then the realization that the reason it's hard to identify what you enjoy most about gardening is that there's so much about gardening that you enjoy. And so that's okay. You don't need to have a single reason. It can be a number of things. Lily says, sometimes I think I just like to argue with Mother Nature. So that's a good option. Mother Nature typically is going to win the argument, but go for it. If you like that, then absolutely go for it. B says, I enjoy planting my flowers, tending them, and watching the plants grow. I love bird watching. So peaceful. Fantastic. I especially like the hummingbird. My hummingbirds, I think, may have left the area. I haven't seen them recently. But I just love not only sitting and watching the birds, but particularly the hummingbirds and the little finches. I've got all my sunflowers that I let grow everywhere in the garden. And when they start to seed, the finches come and will nest on the little sunflower heads and peck at the seeds. I love that. Absolutely love that. Just and I can watch for a long time. Sometimes it seems like it's a couple hours. I'm just sitting in the garden watching the birds and the bees and everything else that's going on. DJ says the birds, the butterflies, the relaxation, and the excitement when the plants grow. Yeah. Isn't this? I'm enjoying this. Aren't you enjoying the idea that you're able to express some of what you enjoy, but also that you're seeing what others are expressing and saying, hey, yeah, that is something that I agree as well. And you can actually look at the happy birthday baby seedlings. Yeah, when those seedlings pop up, it is like you're having babies. And you tend for them, you tend to them, and you care for them. And there is a birthday feeling. Mobius has a flock of chickadees. Yeah, I love the chickadees. And there is a flock. Chickadees tend to flock. And so I'll walk out to my garden and then just whoosh as the chickadees leave all the sunflowers that they've been pecking on as well. So that's fantastic. Ladies Garden and Home says, good morning. Good morning back to you. I enjoy being outside in nature and being able to witness God's miracles firsthand. Yeah, it's the witnessing of everything around you. Already says, love planting seeds. And this is kind of like what I was talking about with the building. I love building a garden, and separately, I love planting seeds as well. Often, I'm not as concerned about whether I actually get all the seeds germinating and I get to full harvest. Sometimes it's just that putting the seeds in the ground, especially after a long, cold winter, that act alone can be enough to satisfy me in the early season. Then, of course, when everything pops up, it's great. It's even more enjoyable. But sometimes that single act of putting a seed in the ground is just kind of a breakthrough. And back to that mental health idea where I have long, cold winters. And when I can finally put those seeds in the ground, maybe in April, usually in May, it tells me that winter's over and the summer is coming. And I absolutely love that. Virginia says, just came up from my garden this AM. I grow squash for my sister's golden retrievers. She cooks their meals. I share with everyone who comes by. Fantastic. I should probably give squash to my dogs. I hadn't thought about that. I know pumpkin is good to feed your dogs, but I hadn't even thought about the squash. I'll maybe I'll cook up some zucchini to give to my dogs, and I enjoying my dogs. So if my dogs are enjoyed by my zucchini, based on your suggestion, more enjoyment in the garden. I like that. I hadn't really thought about that. Petrus Vandermeer says, "Enjoy the friends I made, inspiring people, and learn of others, and looking for inspiration from fellow gardens." That's a good point. I'd like to stress that looking for inspiration from fellow gardeners. You've heard me say this many times, that I encourage you visit other gardens, and I love going to other gardens. And I went to a fantastic community garden this week, and it's getting the inspiration from other gardeners, because everybody gardens differently. And sometimes I'll take the ideas that others have used and bring it into my garden, but more often it's just inspiring to see what other people are doing in their little plot of a garden, and I get enjoyment out of that. I get inspiration for something I might do, but it's just that overall sense of inspiration that brings enjoyment. So, fantastic idea. Gina says, being able to say at dinner how much of the meal came fresh and pesticide free from the garden. I'm so proud of that. You should be proud of that. Sunset Gazing says, I enjoy how creating a garden and planting trees has brought in birds, butterflies, bees, dragonflies, and lizards in the yard. The backyard was a blank slate, only grass to mow. I love getting rid of mass and turning it into a landscape filled with life. So good for you. And I see them occasionally. I don't think it was a dragonfly. I think it was a damselfly. I actually need to look it up for sure. But I love when I see those new things come into the garden. Haven't seen it yet this year, but last year and the year before I had praying mantids in the garden. So I know they're out there. I imagine they're hiding. But all of that, every time something new shows up in the garden, it's fantastic. Yes, going from a blank slate to someplace filled with life, it's fantastic. Betty Barnes likes the growing new kinds of veggies and experiments. So much enjoyment there. Shandy's Garden says, customizing my plate. Exactly. You can't find this stuff in the grocery store. Not just the variety, but the freshness, of course. And Mobius has added, I enjoy saving seeds. There you go. I love this, because we're covering the whole spectrum. There's the enjoyment of sowing the seeds, and absolutely there's the enjoyment of saving the seeds. I've got so many bags and so many jars and so many envelopes of seeds that will never be planted, but I enjoy it as well. I enjoy just saving the seeds and labeling the bag or the jar and anticipating that someday they may find a way back into the garden, but it doesn't matter. I've got the seeds, and I enjoyed the process of saving the seeds in the first place. Wasabi Gal says, gardening stimulates creative and critical thinking, releases hormones in the body that contribute to happiness, and gets us moving. Absolutely. Yeah, Blessed Hands agrees with Heidi's comment that sharing is caring. Wonderful, wonderful. And I wish I could read and pronounce this, but I'm so glad to have you here. I just ran from my garden to my shelter twice today because Lebanon fired rockets at my village in northern Israel. So not so calming anymore. So sorry to hear that. I hope that you are able to get back into your garden at some point, and it can bring you that peace and calming that you're looking for. That's so important. And all of us have turmoil of some type or another, and I think as we were just talking about with the mental energy and the hormones in the body that contribute to happiness, a lot of that happens within the garden. Garden is asking, is it possible to grow food in a flat window? So I'm not sure what you mean by a flat window, but it has to do with the amount of sun. So if the window is facing in a direction that gets sun, then sure, it's absolutely possible. If that window is not getting the sun and direct light, then it's more challenging. And you should think about the supplemental lighting that you would need, some other light source that can give the plants what they're looking for. But a lot of people are growing near a window as long as you have the light that's able to get to it. Shandy's garden says, whenever I feel down and like I can't do anything right, I just look outside. Easy wins. Absolutely. Eva Nichols Art says, I'm an artist, so gardening is my other creative outlet and it inspires my artwork. I have created many little nooks where I can sit and enjoy my garden. As a bonus, I love to be able to harvest. Great points. When I was designing the plants and the structure of the Galileo garden, that was part of it. I actually created sitting spaces and different areas for the students to sit and do artwork with different plants. And for anyone that's an artist, if you've ever been to an art class where you have a central figure, or it might be just, I used to do this at the Galileo school. I would take from the garden squashes and pumpkins and cucumbers and do still life in the center. So you'd have like a ring of art students, and in the center you have whatever the object is that you're drawing or you're painting. And what's so nice about that, I'm not an artist by any stretch, but when you see the results of that artwork, everybody's perspective is different. Each of the students is looking at that still life in the center from a different perspective. And so their picture is going to be different from everybody else's. I love that about gardening, especially if you can create some of your little nooks, some of the areas that you can sit or stand and do the drawing or the painting, because the perspective changes every time you go in the garden to a different area. And what's in front of you one day is behind you the next day. So just turn around and you've got a completely different view. So art in the garden is a fantastic way to use a garden. Dan says, I'm quite proud of my garden build. There you go. Be proud of it. I have absolutely no problem with us being prideful of what we do in the garden. We should be proud of what we do. Eddie Lyle says, as a physically disabled man with a bad back, I grow now for survival. I have a hard time anymore really enjoying the process. I do, however, still enjoy the knowledge of know-how and the harvest. Build on that, especially for those of you who are growing to eat, who are growing so that you can feed your family or feed yourself. It's easy to get away from that sense of enjoyment. And so even if it is just the knowledge that you know enough now to be able to harvest what you need for survival, yes, be proud of that and enjoy it. Try to spark that enjoyment again. And I take it, I said we're covering the whole spectrum. I take it one step further after the harvest. And we haven't talked too much about this. Many of you have talked about the taste and the health aspect of the gardening, but how much do you enjoy the meal because you harvested it, because you made it yourself? Earlier on today, I talked about that hillbilly tomato. I just thoroughly enjoyed eating that tomato. And I enjoyed a pesto. I had pesto pasta last night, or pasta with pesto. And it was a pesto that I made from the basil leaves that I grew in my garden. It's fantastic. So I enjoyed my meal, not only because it was sustenance, but because it came from my garden. And when I was eating that pasta, I was thinking about all that basil that I harvested to make that pesto. So it's that full spectrum, from the thinking about what you're going to do to actually enjoying it after you've done it. I think can really make a big difference. Root Trackers by Yara says, I love giving back to the pollinators, bees, butterflies, and transitioning the soil underground with our buried vermicompost bins. That's wonderful. When we've talked about the wildlife, and I talked about the birdhouses. Yes, if you build it, they will come. And so giving back to them, I look at that as well. I leave most, if not all, my flowers in different sections of my garden up year round. Well, until they actually fall over in winter, but for the birds to give back. I love that the birds are eating insects in my garden. I love that the birds are giving me enjoyment. So I'm giving back to the birds as well by leaving my flowers to them. And the same with the pollen for the butterflies, and even for the hummingbirds. If you've never seen a hummingbird go to a flower, that's so enjoyable. I have the hummingbird feeders with the sugar water. So many people do. And that's typically, at least here in the United States, our vision of the hummingbird is around the hummingbird feeder. But when you see the hummingbird actually going to the flowers and collecting the nectar, it's fantastic. I grow specific flowers for the hummingbirds. And there are many a year. This year was one of them. The hummingbirds came to my garden before I had my hummingbird feeder up because there were flowers for them to enjoy. Milltown Life says, I love gardening for the community. I and a group of dedicated guerrilla gardeners take care of garden so many of the and garden in so many of the in-between places. That's if you're not familiar with guerrilla gardening, I did a video about seed bombs and talked about guerrilla gardening a few years ago. Look it up, do some searches, particularly in urban areas where there's a lot of those in between spaces. There's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of rock, there's maybe buildings that have fallen over, but plants can grow in many of those areas. And the idea of guerrilla gardening is getting out there and putting plants in areas that you might not normally see plants. So I love that idea. And it is one of those things. I bet it is just loaded with satisfaction when you're able to do that. Gina says, I love how the garden's different every day as things grow and fail, and how that keeps me in sync with the seasons. And it does. I was thinking about that the other day as well, how the garden doesn't necessarily follow the calendar as far as the gardening knowing that it's September 2nd. But I can see in the garden the changing seasons. And it does highlight for me the year and what has happened and what's to come. So I enjoy that aspect of as well. Dennis Blevin says, it's constant learning for me and something to keep me active in my retirement. I'm lucky that I can grow all year. Yeah, good for you. You are lucky to grow all year. I would just be ecstatic to be trying things at all different times of year if I could. So I'm happy that I have what I have, and it's enough to keep me satisfied and have that enjoyment. So good for you. In retirement, for those of us that have reached retirement, yeah, gardening is something to do. My brother-in-law has been talking about retiring for a couple years now, and that's a big part of our conversation. Is you got to have something to do. And so I've got my YouTube channel, I've got my garden, I've got this live stream because it is something that keeps me active in retirement. If you don't have that something and you sit in the TV or sit in your chair and watch TV all day, end up doing nothing, your life is probably going to end up being shorter than it could be. When you get outside and you enjoy all these aspects of gardening, not only is your life richer, but literally studies have shown you will live longer as a result of that mental well-being that is so improved in the garden. Mobius says, when I discovered I could grow herbs outside in zone 5B, I thought years ago it was possible. There was no stopping me. Good for you. I've got so many herbs growing, and I commented, I took a picture of my stinging nettle for my Instagram page. Uh, I have been making tea, particularly mint tea, or occasionally echinacea tea, and many others. I've got a few videos on that. But this was the first time that I actually made stinging nettle tea. And I had originally grown stinging nettle to use as a tea for plants because it's loaded with different nutrients. And now I've learned much more about stinging nettle as a tea for humans because of all of those nutrients and the benefits. I liked it. I really enjoyed my stinging nettle tea. So harvested a whole bunch of the stinging nettle. We'll harvest a whole bunch more of that nettle. And over the course of the winter, we'll be enjoying some of that tea and looking forward to next year when I can actually have more of it fresh. So there's so many wonderful herbs that we can grow in our garden. And I'm in zone 5B as well. Many of them are perennial and will come back even in the coldest environments. So get out there and do it. John C says attracting the wildlife was the reason I first started gardening. Growing food came later. So nice to have fresh and chemical-free food that tasted so much better than store-bought. Deb says happy accidents are such a joy, whether it's flowers popping up next to and intermingling to produce a living bouquet, or the mustards and parsley that nature knew when to germinate. So wonderful. Lisa says, anyone with kids enjoy the peace and quiet. Yeah. So we have different levels of enjoyment for the peace, but that's a good one. I like that. I enjoy the peace and quiet in general, but particularly if you've got kids, that is one of those things that it may be even more enjoyable. That's funny. Wasabi Gal says, when my friend's son asked her why she was always in the garden, she said, Lewis, plants don't talk. That's funny. So it's the same reason, the same enjoyment, that peace and quiet in the garden, but the full satisfaction of why the peace and quiet is so enjoyable. I love the fact that it can be so much different. Gina says, I love crop swapping and exchanging canned goods and information with my gardening friends. The gardening community is just the best. Mobius 9A1 says, my garden rewarded me when supply chain issues cropped up during COVID. Such a blessing. Are these resonating with you? There are so many of these things that I read and say, oh yeah, absolutely. Lama Lama says, I love the experimentation, the independence, the health value, the creativity allows me. Most of all, I love getting to witness nature in its prime and what it teaches about life. Very spiritual. Ordy says, my youngest helps mom a lot. My son wants mommy move in, old mommy. Okay. Bowtie Life says, I have a dozen watermelon plants that are nothing next to 5 loofah plants that now measure nearly 70 feet end to end. So much to enjoy. Big Will Dog says, what I like best about gardening is there's always something to do with your free time. And use all that free time to do something, because if you don't, like me right now, there's so many weeds that now have to be taken care of, and it's so much work in areas that I wish I could do other things. And then there's other areas of my garden with all those weeds that I'm just letting go because it's okay. You can let your free time be beneficial if it needs to be, and sometimes that free time just needs to be sitting and enjoying it. I do a lot of stuff in my free time, and then I try to carve out those times when I do nothing. Petrus says, I have a medical condition, can garden to my abilities, remind me for what I did, or reward me for what I did. So that's really good. And a few of you have mentioned some of the medical conditions. And so gardening, even if it just gives you that one little thing based on what your abilities allow you to do, it's rewarding. And that reward is an absolute enjoyment that you can take full advantage of. Serena says, sometimes come up with new jokes while in the garden. There you go, that creativity. Lily says it's a big miracle when your child stops doing drugs and decides they're going to garden. Oh, wow. Yes, that is a miracle. And so much enjoyment from both sides, I hope, take place as a result of that. Mobius says, a refuge. Oh, my. Of course. Of course. Big Wes's Lawn Care says, my garden is mine. Yesterday, I asked the wife to go pick some cherry tomatoes. She came back and said, there's this big uh, eyes. I saw her eyes. I think she may have had her mind blown. That's funny. So, oh, it looks like a big tomato. I guess that's what it was. And there's a tomato this big. Got it. Okay. Trying to figure out what the symbols were. So there was a tomato this big, and came back with her mind blown. So that's fantastic. My granddaughters, I talk about going to the garden, and when they come back with that same mind blown because they saw something, that's absolutely wonderful. The enjoyment of not what we're doing in the garden, but what others are doing in the garden. Absolutely, so much fun. Boothby Garden says that feeling on a hot day when you put your hand in the cool soil to test for moisture. It's little things like that that sometimes we don't take the time to enjoy. And so I love that you say that, because we're all putting our hands into the soil. We're all touching our plants, but are you stopping in that moment to enjoy the moment? The fact that the soil is cool on a hot day, or I see this a lot, particularly in the spring, the soil is warm on a cold day. Oh, absolutely. That brings enjoyment to the garden. And I think it's one of those things to highlight, and it can make a difference in your day. Llama Llama says, this makes me realize that I really can't truly articulate just what gardening does for me. It makes my heart full of gratitude and joy. And don't feel like you need to articulate it for others. It's an internalization of what we enjoy in the garden. And even if we can't put it into words, even for ourselves, it's still something that we recognize is going to give us that enjoyment. Big West's Lawn Care said, focused on a pollinator, wildflowers, flower and tomato garden. The bees are way more this year. They bug everyone but me. You think they know? It's I I who was I talking to recently? At someone, a friend I think I hadn't seen in a while, and they were reminding me that at the Galileo Garden, when I had students there, and a teacher and I were working in the program, and we taught the kids about bees, and particularly the bumblebees, because they're so big and fuzzy and tend to be a little more stable than the honeybees. But you can actually pet a bee while it's on the flower. And so they were talking about how they had carried that lesson on to one of their kids or grandkids. And it was just so enjoyable to see the kid petting the bee. And so, yeah, I think they do know. If you are in a garden and there's a whole bunch of bees, don't know what causes it, but I don't get bugged by bees. I don't get stung by bees, and I can actually handle the bees without any issue. And they know that they're not in danger, and that it's not anything that they should be concerned about. Teenage Gardener says, I really enjoy the learning experience that I get from gardening. Fantastic. Variety selection, disease resistance and prevention, cultural practices, pruning techniques. Fantastic. And that should never end. A few of you earlier have said that it's an endless process. There's always something to learn. There's always something more. And so to recognize that early on and to enjoy the learning experience, it just gets better and better. I've been doing this for over 35 years, and I'm constantly learning, and I'm constantly enjoying the learning of all the things that are moving forward. Hello, Rick says, no rain for the past few weeks in Sydney, nearly out of rainwater for the garden with this windy weather and warm weather. More watering required. I hope you get some rain. We were in the monsoon season for about a week this year, and had some good rains, and now no rain in the forecast. So more watering required, absolutely. But I enjoy watering. I actually enjoy getting out there. When I water my whole garden and I water by hand, it takes about an hour and a half. And so all these things that I've been talking about, seeing the bees, seeing the ants, touching the plants, feeling the soil, all of that happens while I'm out in the garden as part of that watering process. So even when there's a chore that takes a while, find those moments that you can enjoy along the way, especially if you don't have rain. You're going to be in the garden longer taking care of those those watering chores. So make the best of it. Jackie Krantz says, my dog and I love to have snacks in the garden. So I don't know if your dog does this. Mala hasn't done it recently. Lika has already tried to do it, but they'll find something that they like in the garden and they'll help themselves to it. So my cherry tomatoes are just starting to come in. Mala knows she can jump up on the bed and eat the tomatoes. So I'm guessing that's going to come. So I share snacks with my dogs. Sometimes they don't tell me about it. And as I showed in my recent strawberry video, Lika has found out that she likes strawberries. So she's already trying to get into the strawberry beds to eat the strawberries. So I will share snacks with them, sometimes in an attempt to get them away from the other beds. But it is one of those things that work with them as opposed to trying to fight them. Hey, Tony, I'm catching up on the comments, but saw that you checked in a little while ago. And so nice to see that you're here today. And it's probably about the time that you might be leaving. So glad that you can join us as you head back to work. So many things that we're talking about today with all the benefits of gardening and what we enjoy about the gardening process. And I'm going to try to get a little bit closer to real time. Petra says, Scott and Tony, thanks for your teaching. You're very, very welcome. That is one of the things I get the most enjoyment from, me personally, is being able to share some of what I know, some of what I've done, and that it passes on to others who can benefit from it. So thank you for saying that. I think that's wonderful. Super Seamster Sewing Show says, I love the digging, hand and feet in the earth, and of course, the eating. I haven't done enough of this. And so I like that idea. My garden is so big and I've got the chunky wood chip mulch that it's been a long time since I've been barefoot in my garden. But if you have a garden that you can actually get your feet into, do it. I love getting my hands in the soil. I love getting my body in the soil. There are times when I'm working in, particularly during the seed sowing, maybe thinning the plants. I'm full-fledged leaning over a bed, my hands, my arms, my elbows. Oh, it's just so fantastic when it's in contact with the earth. And I'm not doing my feet anymore. I think I may just have to go out and take my shoes off, take my socks off, and stick my feet in the ground. I think that's a fantastic idea. So you got me intrigued. I'm going to go stick my feet in the ground. I have a brand new bed, no plants in it yet. It's fresh soil, and it's an easy step in. Normally, I don't like to step into my beds, but I think I'm going to do that today. So thank you for that idea. I just am suddenly enjoying the thought of going out into my garden and stepping into a bed barefoot. It's been years. So, oh, fantastic. So glad that we can get together today and come up with some of these ideas. Rick says, yay, 400K subscribers. Congratulations, Gardener Scott. Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I hit the 400K mark, and appreciations to all of you who helped me reach the point. I know many of you aren't subscribers. That's okay. You don't have to be a subscriber to enjoy what we do here. But if you are a subscriber, thank you for being one of those 400K. And if you're not a subscriber, well, then subscribe and help me get to 500,000. That would be fantastic. That's probably going to take a few years, but You never know. COVID just accelerated the process, and who knows how YouTube will change the algorithm. It could happen overnight. Both Tony and I will get out of the 400s and get to the 500s. That would be fantastic. So, Serena's asking, I have 3 black diamond watermelon vines, and none of them have even started growing any watermelon yet. One of them is getting yellow leaves with black spots. Disease or nutrients? Could be a disease. I'm not sure what nutrient deficiency would cause black spots on yellow leaves, but do a search of black spots on yellow leaves, see what you find, or watermelon leaves yellow with black spots. And I bet you'll find some pictures that will tell you what it could be. And then you can do a little bit more research. Tony says, I know I already said it, but congrats again on 400K, mate. So awesome and well deserved. Well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. Yeah, it is one of those things that I was looking forward to it. I was checking my numbers every day, and then it happened, and now it's like, whew, made it. And I don't even think about it much anymore because I'm out in the garden doing gardening things. So I do appreciate when you highlight those kind of things for me because it really makes a big difference. Big West's Lawn Care says, learn composting from Tony. He's fantastic with that. I haven't needed to learn much aside from your tutoring, sir. A few Dr. Elaine ideas, David the Good experimenting, and Gardner Scott's vids covered it all. Well said. Yeah. In fact, when it comes to composting, yeah, I would say Tony and Elaine Ingham and David the Good and me, we do cover it all. So if you want to try composting, I have lazy composting videos. I've got some basic composting videos. Tony has some videos much more in depth than I do. Dr. Elaine goes into the science behind it and the microbes. And David the Good is always trying new and different ways to compost. So a great diversity of information on a basic topic. So thank you for pointing that out. And I think it's well said. I enjoy the research, and I enjoy watching YouTube videos, and I enjoy seeing how different gardeners do something in a different way. I may not choose to do it that way. Maybe I will choose at some point to try it, but I just enjoy that information. I love that learning, and I love finding out how other people are gardening, especially when it's different from how I do it. Ruth Ann says, I love that my neighbors and neighborhoods see the beauty in my garden. My heart warms when someone walks past and stops to chat. Absolutely fantastic. It's making new friends that you didn't have before because of your garden. Absolutely fantastic. Super Seamster Sewing Show. Thank you for that contribution. I appreciate it. What mixtures make mature plants grow in container? And so I have a few videos on my basic potting soil blends. And I talk a little bit about it in some of those videos. And so the way I approach the mature plants, in fact, I just worked on a couple pots this week that I amended my potting blend. So the initial blend of a potting mix, and this holds true for whether you buy it or if you make it using a recipe like mine, the basic blend tends to be soilless. It's all organic material. So it's peat moss or cocoa coir. It is compost. It might be forest products. That's what's often in the bagged materials. It could be worm castings. It could be leaf mold, but it's going to be soilless. It's all organic material. That's wonderful. Much of that provides nutrients. It holds on to the water. But the biggest concern is that it decomposes. And even compost that is mostly decomposed will continue to break down. So in containers, if you're using a soilless mix, you can expect that the soil level is going to drop as that material decomposes and the nutrients are going to be used up. So, for mature plants, a mixture should include an inorganic material. So, usually it'll have vermiculite or perlite that help with the drainage, but it also helps the soil structure because they're not going to decompose. For outside pots and outside, even some of my smaller beds that I treat as containers, I add my sandy soil again to add structure to it so that it isn't 100% organic matter, that there is at least half inorganic material, be it sand or the perlite or the vermiculite or even clay. You can actually have clay soil in your pots, but something that helps stabilize the mix. And then as it drops and decomposes, it's not going to be as dramatic. And because you can always add some more compost on top or maybe some mulch that will break down over time. You'll need to add additional nutrients. This is the one case that I will use fertilizers, organic fertilizers in my pots and containers. But consider that. Consider a mixture that is more than just a bagged potting mix and something that actually has a soil component, a mineral-based soil. And if you don't have mineral-based soil, then rock dust is one of those things that you'll see a lot of gardeners add to their containers to achieve that some of that structure and some of the minerals that the plants need. And when you put all that together, it tends to make it better for the mature plants, for plants that are going to be staying in a pot for a while. It really does help to have that structure in place before you put the plant in. Venice Weeks says, sang a cheer. Ozzy, hello, everyone. Just joined in. It's always nice to have the Aussies here, especially since the time is so different. It's early morning for you. So I'm assuming you're in Australia as you're giving the Aussie hello and that you are staying awake to be with us on the chat today. But if you're not in Australia, then we appreciate the Aussie hello. Absolutely. Mobius says, I have this fantasy that the hummingbirds say thank you. They do a little dance outside my window. Blows my mind. It's funny you say that because, like I said, I like sitting in the garden and watching all the birds. But it was last week before this last week, and I was sitting out in my garden, and I've had my hummingbird feeder up for weeks, and I've had the flowers that were flowering for a couple months now, and had this hummingbird that was going from the feeder to the flowers. And then it came and it was like 3 feet in front of my face, just hovering, looking at me. And I kind of had that feeling too, that the hummingbird was just kind of saying, thanks. I've been coming here for weeks and I appreciate everything you've done for me. I know birds don't talk, but I would agree with you, Mobius, that sometimes it's mind blowing that it's like they're trying to communicate. It's probably just a coincidence. They saw me sitting there and were fluttering by and decided to hover and take a look to figure out what kind of animal I was. But it's also enjoyable to think that maybe they were trying to communicate their gratitude. And I think I think it's a fantastic idea if that really is the case. Serena says, we got a wasp nest above the front door. Is there a way to deter wasps from putting the nest there so we still get them in the garden? So depends on the type of wasp, whether it's a paper wasp or some other type of wasp, but different wasps will nest in different areas. And so the way to deter them is to recognize the areas that they tend to nest in and then put up some barrier to them nesting in that spot. And there's lots of stuff that are sold that you can nail into a post or screw into a wall to block the corner that they might be using. Often it's more just keep an eye on it. The areas that I know the paper wasps in particular will be building a nest, I look, on a regular basis. And if I see that a nest is starting, like when they just have that, that little nub that is going to be the main support for the nest, I knock it down. There might only be one or two wasps that are building it. Really easy to knock down at that point, and they rarely come back. You don't want to wait until you've got a full nest of wasps to take it down. Just get it early. So recognize where they are and to put a barrier there or knock it down when it's still early. And that's one of the ways to deal with them that really tends to work pretty well. Sherry says, if you can come up with a use for Russian thistle, I'll be in your dead forever. It's the bane of my existence. I've been dealing a lot with Russian thistle. It's growing everywhere. Every time I'm walking in my garden, I'm reaching down and picking it up. I try to grab it when it's still small and then just let it fall. So the use that I have is as a mulch, and it's popping up in my wood chip mulch. And so I'll just pull it out and drop it, and now it's extra mulch. Some of the bigger plants that didn't get to as early, I'll throw into my compost pile. So compost and mulch is how I deal with my Russian thistle. And and this is the time of year that it really suddenly becomes a problem. And so you got to stay on top of it before it actually gets that full bushy, stickery mess that none of us like. Masabi says, I just went to my friends and got cuttings of 4 types of hydrangea, wisteria, and 2 types of grapes. Cool. So excited at the possibilities. There's some enjoyment with a quadruple exclamation point. The excitement is enjoyable when you get those kind of new things that are coming your way. Fantastic. Mary Lou says, I enjoyed a tablespoon of ground nettle leaves from my garden in Lakewood, Colorado, in my morning protein shake. I harvested more stinging nettle this morning. Good for you. So I've been trying to think of other uses for it. I like the tea, but I was considering how I could turn it into a powder and sprinkle it on something as well. So I'm glad to hear that you're doing it in a protein shake. So that's given me some ideas as well. I'll harvest and powder and then decide what I'm going to sprinkle it on. And not sure how much flavor it adds, but uh, it's all about the benefits that we would be using when we put a powder like that in place. Jay is here. Hi, Jay. I was a little concerned about you. I don't know if you watched from the beginning or not, but it is a holiday and you forgot. It's okay. No problem. I was just a little concerned. Maybe you were having some health issues. So glad that you could be here with us today. And I do appreciate you spending your time with us, especially on a holiday. And it's still a garden day. So those of you that are on holiday and able to get outside and turn what would normally be a work day into a garden day, I say go for it and take advantage of some of these benefits that we've been talking about with how we like getting out in the garden. Ruth Ann says, I garden in flip flops through the summer. Yeah, talking about the barefoot in the garden, flip flops is a good option. In the Galileo garden, because we were doing so much building in the garden, and because the kids would just run through it, we actually had a rule: no flip flops, no open-toed shoes in the garden, because we didn't want anyone getting their toes injured. But for you, by yourself, in your garden, absolutely get out there and take advantage of the toes in the open air. And that's one of those things that you just can't put a price on that. It is so wonderful. Big West's lawn care. I'm very grateful for being shown Gardener Scott. Well, thank you for that. I'm easily annoyed and don't want to waste too much time. And this channel is like school without all the extra. I can't explain it, but pro school. Oh, I thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that I can convey that attitude for you, that it is enjoyable. And a lot of people told me that they enjoy just hanging out with me and watching a video or being part of the live stream. And so I'm glad that I can convey that warmth and that calm and whatever it happens to be that you enjoy from it, along with the pro school aspect, where there's a lot of information that we share on this channel. And I appreciate all of you that are here, because it is one of those things that uh, I and I say this, I think, every week. I just enjoy all of you and enjoy this time that we have together. Deb says, this chat and all the comments have made me realize that I love so many, all aspects of gardening. Good. That was the point. I talked about that early on. That's kind of what I was hoping for. And all of you don't have to feel that way, not at all. But if some of you, any of you, of course, is uh, is going to reach that realization today that you really do enjoy so many different aspects, because there's so much of gardening that does become a chore. Weeding is probably at the top of everybody's list. But when I was at the Galileo Garden and had all the different volunteers, I had one volunteer, and she was a little bit older than me, but she loved weeding. And so when we get a group of volunteers, and sometimes it would be just two people, might be five people, might be just one person. But whenever she came to the garden and we had activities that needed to be done, those chores, she wanted to weed because she just loved weeding. She could get down and she had gloves and she'd pull the weeds or cut the weeds. And that brought her satisfaction. So even the worst chores that we think are terrible to do in the garden, there's somebody that loves that. And so try to capture a little bit of that. And if someone else can enjoy it, then maybe you can find some enjoyment. Now, all of a sudden, it's not a chore. And when you're out in the garden doing all those activities, time flies when you're having fun. So that's one way I like to look at those chores, is to make them as enjoyable as possible so that they do just fly by, and you're not sitting there in the dirt complaining about all the plants that you have to pull out because the weeds are so bad this year. It's one of those kind of things that I'd rather be sitting in the soil with all those insects and birds and everything around me, and stopping occasionally and saying, "Oh, look at that thing that's crawling on the ground. I wouldn't have seen that thing if I wasn't down and doing some weeding." So it's finding that happy balance that allows us to work, have a chore, but to also see something that we might not otherwise have seen. Cocoa Brown Gal. Cocoa Brown Gal. I'm guessing that's what that is. Thank you for that. I enjoy gardening for the solitude and the memories it brings of being in the garden with my mom and granddaddy. Congrats on 400K. Loving the garden app. Oh, so wonderful. Thank you for saying that. And that's something that I talk about it in a video that I did last year about why to garden. I talk about memories being an important aspect of why we garden. That's a big reason why I garden. I don't have those same memories of being in the garden with my mom or my dad or my grandparents. I don't come from a family of gardeners, but there were a few moments. My aunt had a garden. I've talked about this occasionally, about the memories in my aunt's garden. And my grandmother did live at a house. I don't remember her being a gardener, but she lived at a house that had rose bushes. And I can remember walking on the brick path next to those rose bushes. Now, recreating that moment, I was 2 years old, maybe 2.5 years old, in her backyard. That's when she lived in that house. So some of those memories that are built in the garden can go way back in our life and way back in our memories. That's how strong some of those memories can be within the garden. And so that the fact that you can be in the garden and have some of those memories come back to you, especially in your solitude, that's absolutely fantastic. So glad to hear that. And I've talked about, and that was really the focus of that video I referenced, creating new memories. So I garden to bring up some of those memories, but I also garden with the intent of creating new memories, often for me, but more often for someone else, particularly my granddaughters, like when we did the purple garden a couple years ago. So there's a lot that I do because I would like my family to think back 60 years from now plus about that time they were in my garden and the memories that they have from the time that I was able to give them. And you can do that too. You can create those memories, and you can also sit in your garden and bring back some of those memories that maybe you thought were lost. So use that solitude and use that time to be able to get out there and take advantage of that. I think maybe it's one of those things that you could really, really enjoy. Llama Llama has been a member for 10 months. Such a great topic. I wish it lasted more than 90 minutes. Thank you, Gardner Scott, for creating and fostering such an amazing community. You are so, so welcome. And I can't just adequately express my gratitude. Ruth Ann is saying, what's a great live topic. Thank you, Garner Scott. You are so very, very welcome as well. And uh, I spent a lot of time this week. Most of the time when we do these live streams, I have a pretty good topic in mind. I try to keep it seasonal for many of us, though I recognize all of you in Australia in particular are about to enter spring, completely different season, just as we're about to enter fall. And so sometimes the topics might be 180 degrees. It's all appropriate, of course. But the topic tends to be relatively easy to choose because of what's happening in my garden. And so I could talk about it. This week I had more difficulty. I wanted something a little bit more special, and I wasn't sure what it was we could talk about. And then it came to me. It's like, I say enjoy gardening all the time, but we don't really share with each other that opportunity to see what other people are actually finding enjoyable. And so I'm glad you're enjoying the topic today, because it took me a while to figure out just exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And I'm so glad that you're all enjoying it and participating in it as well. Super Seamster Sewing Show says, I'm seeing some lizards and salamanders, the lizard family. Oh, that I get so much enjoyment from that. I mentioned a month or so ago when I saw a toad in the garden. That to me, when you see the toads and the lizards and the salamanders, the garden that I went to this week, there was a garter snake right there in the path. I absolutely love that. It shows that nature's working in your garden, because those are the animals that are dealing with the slugs and the insect pests that might be harming your plant. So, uh, fantastic. So much enjoyment when I can see the lizard family, because they're going to work. And my garden is going to benefit as a result of that. So, absolutely fantastic. And I mentioned that I saw the damselfly and dragonflies occasionally. Same thing. Those predators that come to the garden, I wish I had more as well, because they're doing their job and they've got so much work to do. And it is so enjoyable to see that nature find its way into the garden to do that job, to keep the balance. Uh, and when I see it, the reason I find enjoyment in those insects and animals is because that's part of my philosophy. That's part of how I garden, is to attract all those natural predators. So when they actually show up, it shows that I did it. It's like building the garden. It's all part of that same process. But you make an effort to do something and then you actually see the results of your labor. It's wonderful. It's so enjoyable. It's not much different from seeing that first ripe tomato or that first delicious pepper. It's the same thing. You've gone to all this effort and you can literally see the fruits of your labor, be it a lizard or a tomato. It's kind of all the same thing. So I get the same satisfaction from it. as I go to the garden, and I'm able to just kind of soak it all up and see the pleasure of the stuff that's happening around me. So absolutely wonderful. Uh, Lauren says a theme that a lot of people tend to mention is being part of the natural world. Because so much of our life tends to be sterile with cars and roads and buildings, and so it is that natural world that really, really, I think, makes a big difference. And Mobius actually has a name for the garden snakes. Cool. I like that idea. I haven't seen a snake yet in my garden. The toad was a big advancement. So there's just they need to come from somewhere. And all the houses around me have nothing in the way of a garden other than my one neighbor. So I'm just hoping that they will find their way to me eventually. And yes, when I get that snake, I will definitely name it. We had a snake when my kids were younger, and it was in the garden, and they named it. I can't remember the name. I'll have to ask my daughter if she can remember the name of the snake we had in the garden. But that is definitely something that that you can do. And you talk to the snake once you name it, and it becomes a friend. So go for it. Big Wes's lawn care saying my mother passed away last month. So sorry to hear that. She's my gardening inspiration. I inherited all her garden books, her writings and logbook, and her garden. I promised her on her deathbed I would save her garden. Oh, that is such a wonderful sentiment. So sorry for your loss, but the idea that you are going to carry it forward, I hope you can find many, many moments of enjoyment in the years ahead, and particularly those memories. I design some areas of my garden with specific memories in mind. I haven't built it yet. I've talked about it, but all of my garden friends, the dogs I've had, I still have their ashes, and I am planning a section of my garden. It'll be one of the last sections I build, and I will build that area specifically for the memory so that every time I go to that spot, I can remember my wonderful friends. We did that with my wife's uh, mother. She had ashes, and we planted a tree and built a space for those ashes, and her father as well. So it was a joint spot underneath that tree with the memories of her mother and father, and that was a spot that was the spot to generate those memories. So it's difficult to lose people in our lives, but there are ways that you can continue, especially when it's their garden and their information and their books and their inspiration. Run with it. And I hope you can make the most of it. And I do wish you the best, of course. Christine Peters, thank you for that. Says, I'm so glad I found your videos. Well, I'm glad you found my videos too, Christine. And I'm so glad that you're here today. There are more coming. I'll share with you in the months ahead some of the things that have happened in my life. And I actually did not produce as many videos this year as I have in the past, but I'm back to doing one a week and have for the last few weeks. And I've got programmed out a number of weeks ahead. And I like having this channel, and I like you all being part of the channel as well. And that was one of the things I realized when I wasn't able to do the videos the way I wanted to do the videos. Wasn't able to do them. I missed doing the videos. I missed seeing you in your comments. And it's one reason why I really wanted to keep this live stream going every week, even when I wasn't able to produce some of the videos, because I do appreciate all of you, and you all do bring me some of that enjoyment. So I'm glad that we can benefit each other. Absolutely. Super Seamster says, I have so much work to do, but I'm hooked on the conversation. That's awesome. So we're almost done. We're coming to an end, but it is so nice that you're hooked and that you're able to be here today, because that's what it's all about. Gina says, I took cuttings from my mother's garden and the plants make me smile when I think of her. What more can be said? That pretty much says it all. John Jude says, for 12 seasons, I've replanted my mom's marigolds from seeds she gifted me. Absolutely fantastic. Sunny the Beast is asking, wow, that's an amazing garden. Do you grow peppers as well? So yeah, this is my garden. I took this picture this morning. So if you look over in this bed, this whole bed off to the side, right in front of this covered area is that's hailcloth. Those are all my tomatoes. You can see how big my tomato plants are. And this bed right in front, it's a little bit darker. It's still in the shade. Those are all peppers. And so if you look closely, you can see some of my peppers are almost 3 feet tall. All these are 2 feet tall. That's a hoop that's just over 2 feet. And so, yeah, I'm growing lots of peppers. This year, my focus has been on Hungarian peppers to make paprika. So while I do have some hot peppers and I do have some sweet peppers, most of what I'm growing are going to be peppers that I will dry and powder and turn into paprika. That's one of the videos that'll be coming in the weeks ahead as those peppers ripen and I'm able to do that. So thank you. I love this time of year when I can show off my garden. That brings me joy because my season is just so short. So I've got melons in this bed right here, directly over my shoulder. This whole bed is cucumbers. Back here, I've got zucchini and squash. Behind my head, I've got my fall bed already going with spinach and cabbage and beets and carrots. And so a little bit of everything. And then, of course, the big section back here with, I think it's 35 or was it 42? I forget how many tomato plants I have, but maybe it's 39. 39 kind of sticks in my head. But I've got a lot of tomato plants growing back there this year, too. So a lot that's going on in the garden and a lot that I'm continuing to do. Hopefully, I've got at least another month, maybe 6 weeks if we're lucky, and the garden will give me much, much more bounty. Jen says, I love that gardening gives me common ground with many different people in a world that often feels very divided. Thanks, God, for fostering community. And I think that's very well said. And that is one of those things. When I talk about gardeners, I'm not talking about any other identifier. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what sex you are. It doesn't matter anything. If you're a gardener, then you're the same as me. And I'm the same as you. And we're the same as everybody else that's on today. We are gardeners. And there's a specialness to that that just no one else would understand if you weren't a gardener. So I'm so glad that I could help with that and build some of that community so that we can all come together as gardeners. I want to give a shout out as we close today to Debbie. I was talking about that garden that I got to tour this week, a community garden. Debbie had invited me up to the community garden to see her plot. We had a wonderful morning chatting about plants and drinking some tea. So thank you, Debbie, for that opportunity. And that's all part of it as well. It's that community mindset in a couple different perspectives. Debbie doesn't have the backyard to have a garden. And so, like many of you in the UK that have the allotments, it's the same basic idea. You want to be a gardener and you make it happen. You find that plot, be it a community garden or an allotment, doesn't have to be in your own backyard. And I've talked with people, they're not gardeners. They're just people who think gardening might be fun, but they don't have the space. There's always a way that you can find the space. And particularly in a community garden where it's a group of people, there's always new ideas. You almost always are going to find someone that's willing to help. Debbie was telling me about the person she had met who has since recently passed away that was a help in the community garden. And that's a big part of the community. We call it a community garden here in the States because it's just a big plot and there's individual plats that gardeners will stake out to grow what they want. They tend to be much, much smaller than the size of an allotment in the UK. But the concept is the same. It's a group area, and we're all growing our plants in. And so the overall community might be doing their own individual things within their own individual garden beds, but as a group, it's all gardeners doing gardening side by side. And if you have the opportunity to either visit a community garden or garden within a community garden or an allotment, I encourage that you do so, because you may end up finding that gardener friend that you would have never seen before. You may have the opportunity to invite someone to come visit the garden and find a new gardening friend. It is all about community when we talk gardeners. Yes, there's the solitude in our garden. Yes, there's those individual moments of enjoyment, but it's also the fact that we are all doing the same thing in our own way, in our own space. And as long as you can do that, and especially after our discussion today, maybe find a few moments of enjoyment, or maybe recognize that you like it all, that makes it so much easier to keep doing it. And that is ultimately what I'd love all of you to be able to do, is to keep gardening daily, weekly, monthly, year after year, so that by the time you get old and gray, you can say that you've been doing it for a long, long time, and you still hope to be doing it for a long time more. That's the way I am. I've been doing it for a long time. I've got a lot of time left to garden. I'm so glad that you all could be here to help me share my gardening world. And I appreciate all of you who shared your gardening world with the rest of us today. I appreciated it. And it gave me some joy. Get out there, get in your garden, do something today, next week. But above all, whatever it is you're doing, enjoy it. I'll see you next Monday.